So hello there and welcome to another tutorial. My name is Tanmay Bakshi, and this time we're going to be going over how you can create a Watson conversation application which includes contextual features, which essentially means, well, let me actually simplify this. So to begin, we're going to be using IBM Watson conversation, more specifically the context feature of the service. And let's just dive right into what this means today. So just before I begin though, I'd like to say a big thank you to one of my subscribers, Udaya, for sending in this question. And so of course, thank you very much for reminding me to create this video. So this is actually kind of a part 2, I guess you could call it, to my earlier drone videos, where you could ask Watson conversation, for example, what's the battery percentage in the drone? And it would be able to answer you. That was using IBM Watson Conversations context feature. So let's take a look at what that is and how it works. So to begin, let's say we've got our Watson conversation little service over here. Okay, so we've got our service. And let's also say that we've got our Node.js application. And of course, we've got our drone. Now, I'm not going to get into how, the Raspberry Pi is able to send messages from the drone into the Node.js and back. Instead, I'm just going to simplify it all by saying that the drone just sends Node.js. The drone keeps sending Node.js a lot of information actually about itself, but one of those keys would be battery percentage. Okay? And so what's happening is that, let's say that Watson conversation, let's say the user's input to Watson conversation would be, what's the battery level? Okay. And they were to send this string to Node.js as input. What would happen is, before sending the request to IBM Watson, no, it's not just going to do that. What's going to happen is it's going to form a request. And so it'll create this little request, and that request will be sent to Watson conversation. The request contains quite a few things, namely the input. It contains the input, which would be, of course, this string. And we've also got, of course, something else like, for example, the context, which is a JSON. And also this is a string. And there are a few more things, but I won't get into that right now. So these are the two keys that are very important to us. So Node.js will form a request, which contains the input and the context, and these two are sent to Watson conversation. So how does this work, though? Well, essentially the context is a JSON value. And this JSON value contains a key called battery P, okay? And this, so if I just draw this contains something called a key called battery P. And the value is really however much battery is left in the drone. For example, 65 for 65%, we're just going to say 65, and then we're going to close our curly brace. And this is essentially our JSON value. We've got our battery P at 65. And so this is the context that's being sent to IBM Watson conversation. And Watson conversation, like the dialogue that I've created here, what it does is, let's say it needs to send, find the battery percentage. It'll actually go through its context, and if it contains the battery P value, then it'll give something else that contains that battery P value. But if it doesn't have this in its context, or this is equal to a null value, what's going to happen is it's going to go through another dialog chain so that it can return back to Node.js, essentially that, sorry, I don't have the battery information right now. Please try asking again later, or make sure that your drone's turned on. That type of thing. Same thing for altitude information, same thing for all this type of information that Watson conversation can give you if you ask for it. But then again, without any further ado, let's get straight to the Mac part now, where I'm going to be showing you how you can code in a simple Node.js application using the same pizza example that I gave you a little while ago in my last Watson conversation video, and now we're going to be incorporating context so that Watson actually knows about the pizza that you're building and is then able to send that pizza over to really any sort of Node.js API so that they can actually request the pizza company to create the pizza for you. Alright, so let's actually do that now. Let's get straight to the Mac part where I'm going to be showing you how to build that Node.js application. Let's go now, shall we?
Alright, so welcome back to the Mac part, and now we're going to be covering how exactly you can create this Watson conversation bot. So now remember, the entire point of this Watson conversation bot is to essentially tell you the current hour and minute, and of course to say hello and goodbye to you. And so let's begin, shall we? So as you can see over here, I've got a terminal window open right here. I can actually just make that a little bigger so it's easier to see. Oops, sorry. And then, of course, over here on this side, I've got the Watson conversation workspace open here. So now let's actually begin by going over this Watson conversation workspace. It's actually quite simple. I just have a bye intent, which has bye, goodbye, I must go, I will go now, see you soon. Time has current time, I need to know the time. Please tell me the time. Time, what's the time? When is it? And then, of course, greeting contains hello, hey, hi, how are you, how do you do, nice to meet you. Now, these are all the intents that we have in this application. Quite simple. Of course, we have no entities because there's nothing complex that we're doing here, but the dialogue is extremely simple as well. We basically just have a greeting where Watson can respond with hello, a bye intent where Watson can respond with bye, I hope to see you soon, and then of course we've got another intent which says, okay, if you want to know the current time, and I currently have the time, meaning that the hour context variable is greater than -1 and the minute context variable is greater than -1. Now, before I explain what that means, and I know this is essentially a tutorial that'll teach you how to actually use context with IBM Watson, before I tell you how this node works here, let me show you a demo of this application in action. So again, this is coded in Node.js here, so if I run this application, as you can see, I've actually salvaged some of this code from my Facebook Live event with IBM, so you can actually go check that out if you'd like. There will be a link in the description. Now, once more, so essentially Watson says hello to us, as you saw in this greeting node, and then we can say to Watson, hey, what's the time? Watson responds with, the time is currently 2:41 a.m. Alright, so now we can also tell it bye. And Watson says bye, I hope to see you soon, then you can exit the application. And so that is essentially how this application works. Now, as you can see, that was actually the correct time over here if you look at the watch. Now, one more thing to note here is that what's happening is every time you send a request to Watson, whether it's saying bye or what's the time or anything, you are sending the current time to IBM Watson. Okay, and this current time is then used by IBM Watson to either give a response or it's just stored. Okay, and so essentially the point is here that let's just say I wanted to use this application during, let's say, inside of this workspace. Okay, so it says, let's just clear this, and so let's just say I say hello or hi in this workspace. It knows that this is a greeting intent and it says hello, but let's just say I say what's the time. It's going to give me an error. Okay, or let's just say, sorry, your application has not provided me with the current time. The reason is because this workspace over here doesn't have the code that I've implemented in order to give Watson conversation the context, which is the current time. However, over here in our Node.js application, it is sending Watson the current time in the context, and so Watson's able to parse that out and give it to you as a response if you've asked for it. And just to make this a bit more clear, let's take a look at the source code itself. So let's begin, as you can see, quite simply, just with any other, just with any type of Node.js application, we are declaring our imports or requires. In this case, we're just importing the Watson Developer Cloud Library. We are also importing, or we're actually defining the variable conversation, which is equal to a new Watson conversation. We're giving it the correct username and password. We're giving it a good version and a version date. And this is where the fun part comes in. So as you can see, I'm actually declaring an object here. Okay, and this object is called context. And inside of context, I'm setting the hour to -1 and the minute to -1. This means that if Watson has not been provided with the current hour and minute for some reason, even though it should be, then they will be -1. And as you can see from this note over here, we are checking if these values are -1. If they're -1, then we're going to say that, sorry, your application has not provided me with this information. But if they're greater than -1, then we know that we can actually, we have this current latest information and we can give it to the user. Next in our Node.js application, we've got a prompt function. And this prompt function, again, this has actually been taken from a Stack Overflow post. And so there will be a link to this prompt function down in the description. Essentially, what this allows me to do is just essentially ask the user for input. And so, essentially, this will allow me to say, okay, let's say I want input from the user to send to IBM Watson conversation. As you can see, I just say you as what I'm asking the user, and then the user types in what they want to send to Watson. That's simple, but of course we've also got a time convert function. Again, very, very simple. This is from a Stack Overflow post, and the link to the Stack Overflow post will be in the description. And this will essentially convert 24-hour time to AM PM time. Okay, and this AM PM time is actually pretty important because, of course, for this example, I wanted to give you 12-hour time, not 24-hour time. And since Node.js by default gives us that 24-hour time, we have to convert that to 12-hour. So this is, again, just a very simple function, not too much related to the core workings of this application or Watson context. Then we have one more function called conversation message, which takes a message. And so this is actually the core function that allows us to, use this application. And so here as you can see, this logic over here basically gets the current date, and it gets a 12-hour time from it using the time convert function. Okay. Then in the context object that, as you know, we have set right here, we are telling the hour to be, we're just, parsing that out of the tconvert result. And then, of course, we're setting the minute to another, we're parsing out the minute from the tconvert result once more. Once that's done, we're calling conversation.message on this conversation variable that we had defined in the beginning of this application. Essentially, this will be given a workspace ID, some input, which is your current message, which was passed to conversation message, and then, of course, the context. And this context contains the, I guess you could say, well, it's quite literally context that IBM Watson should know to continue from if they're asked something related to that context in one of the dialog nodes, or as the intent. And so once we've sent this request to Watson and we've given it the new context and the workspace ID and the input, we wait for its response, and if we got an error, we just print out the error and continue. But if we got a response, then we're going to print out, this is what Watson said, and then we're going to parse out Watson's response. And then we're going to ask for another prompt. Again, our input is you. We want the question to be you. And so basically the callback is, once the user has provided some input, which is in this input variable, we will call conversation message with that input, which becomes an essentially like infinite loop. It'll keep asking you questions, you give Watson some input, it'll give you output, and it continues. After that, we set the context to the response's context. But why do we do this? Well, essentially, let's just say that in the dialog node, Watson had actually modified the context, or there's some update in the context. Well, in that case, we want to set our current context to this new context in order to keep both applications in sync, both Watson and ourselves. And that is basically how it works. And just to, kickstart the conversation, we call conversation message with hi. And that is basically how this entire application works. In fact, let's actually take a look at one more demo here. Let's just say I asked Watson, what's the time by your watch? And as you can see, it says the time is currently 2:47 a.m. Alright, as you can see, then, of course, it continues in that infinite loop and it asks me for more input, but what I can do is just Control-C and exit that infinite loop. Now, one more thing that's absolutely critical to understanding context with Watson conversation is how it's actually used in the dialogue. So as you can see, I'm in the dialog pane of the Watson workspace here, and if I click on this node, which handles giving time to the user, as you can see, this node is triggered by if their intent is to find the time, and if the hour context variable is greater than -1. Now, you already know what the greater than -1 means. -1 is the default, which means that at this point we do not have time if it's -1. Okay, but it is if you're running it from the Node.js application with this code, then it's for sure that it will always be greater than -1. We're just putting this in as a protective measure. And so essentially what this means is, as you can see over here, if I just zoom in maybe a little bit, yeah. So as you can see, I'm actually like getting this context variable with a $sign here. Now, for an intent, you'd put a hashtag symbol. For an entity, you would put an @ symbol. But for this context variable, we're putting a $sign. And as you can see, if I edit the source code here, you can see in the context we're setting the variables hour and minute. And that's what we're doing. $hour and $minute. Those are our context variables. And if you have these variables, that means that Watson is getting this context correctly. And of course, we are checking if it's greater than -1. Then we know in that case that we currently do have a time. And in the response, with the actual response here, we can say that the time is currently, and then give it the context variable for hour and the context variable for minute, in order to give the user the current correct time. And that is essentially how this entire application works and how Watson Conversation deals with context. Of course, thanks to Udaya for sending in this question originally. I hope this was able to help you out. But of course, that's going to be it for this tutorial. Alright, so if you have any more questions, suggestions, or feedback, please do feel free to leave that in the comments down below. Email them to me at tagimani@gmail.com or tweet them to me at tagimani. If you'd like, you can also subscribe to the channel, as it really does help out a lot, and also like the video and share it if you think it could help someone else you know. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video today. Thank you very much. Goodbye.